My grandparents came from Poland and Russia. My grandfather, on my dad's side, opened a little grocery store in Schenectady, New York. They lived in an apartment above it when my dad was growing up. A lot of other immigrant families would come to the store, but during the war, sometimes people didn't have enough to pay for the food, so my grandfather, my dad's dad, was a pretty soft touch, much more gentle, I'm told, than his wife, my grandmother, and so he would let people take the food on credit and never really charge them or ask them to pay it back. My mom's dad was a doctor. He would treat people who couldn't afford to pay him either. Sometimes they would offer him food, like a pie, or sometimes just their thanks. He went around the world with a group called Project Hope that brought medical supplies to kids in Africa and Latin America and Southeast Asia. And he would come home with stories of conditions in these countries that were not at all like my own. I was lucky. My sister and I never had to worry about whether we would have a warm place to go to sleep at night or a doctor to go to when we got sick. Plenty of kids around the world and here in this country can't take those things for granted. And my grandfather taught us that, and taught us as well that we had an obligation to do something about that fact. And that's the obligation that I took to public service. It's the reason I am who I am. My grandparents are gone now, but their memory shapes my life every day. They inspired my mother to become a social worker. She worked in a state mental hospital, and the conditions in the facilities were so bad that eventually the hospitals were shut down. So a lot of folks who were mentally ill ended up under bridges or living in cars or on street corners or died. And I thought about that a lot over the years. The reason I went into public service was to make a difference in the lives of folks who needed a hand. From the Southern Poverty Law Center to a state civil rights agency to the villages of Central America. I got elected to the State House in 2000. I became the minority leader after my first 2 years, the leader of what Westward once called the permanent Democratic minority. Nobody thought we were ever going to take over the House. It had been 30 years. And I learned how to work across the aisle and bring people together to solve tough problems. I'm proud of the leadership I brought to the State House. I'm proud to have led the Democrats to our first majority in 30 years, our first back-to-back majorities now since John Kennedy was president. I built the largest Democratic majority in the State House of Representatives in half a century, and we made a difference. That's what makes me proudest of all. I got a check in the mail the day that I announced my campaign for the Senate from a woman in Colorado Springs. I kept a copy of it. It's a little tattered now, for $10. And she wrote a note too. She said, "Dear Andrew, I wish it could be more, but I lost my job 11 months ago. Company closed. Very hard with a single income. Savings are almost gone. When you get to Washington," she said, "please remember people like me." And then she said, "Please let me know of any job opportunities you may come across." So what I believe with all my heart is that a woman in her circumstances deserves the ear of a congressman or a senator, whether she had $10 to contribute or $10,000 or no amount of money at all. We ought to be willing to value her voice, not because of her net worth, but just because of her inherent worth as a human being.